Ladies and gentlemen, for our first session of the day, please welcome Representative Mike Haridopolos, Chairman of the Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee, for a fireside chat moderated by Stephen Overly, host of POLITICO Tech.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm excited to be here to kick off day 2 of the AI Plus Space Summit with a timely conversation about U.S. competition and competitiveness in space. And joining me here today is Congressman Mike Haridopolos, Chairman of the Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee in the House. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I feel like I'm running down the walkway here in my model. This is great.
Right, I know, a catwalk to come out. This is the treatment. Let's start with space news of the day. In about an hour, your colleagues over in the Senate Commerce Committee will have a nomination hearing for billionaire entrepreneur Jared Isaacman to lead NASA. You've supported him in the past. He was nominated, withdrawn, re-nominated. Do you still think he's the right person to lead that agency?
I do, and for the simple reason that the reason why we're leading in space once again is the fact that we have public-private partnerships. You have a person who understands the private sector, not just the NASA traditional space world. And I think he'll bring a new dynamic to NASA. And as you know, for the last year, we've not had that official head. Janet Petro did a nice job. Of course, the Secretary of Transportation did a nice job. And we need a person exclusively focused on space. It is the future, literally. And I think Mr. Isaacman has a unique temperament and background that will really help us propel and continue to lead in the space race. And I'm optimistic that he'll be confirmed by the Senate and we can work closely with him. Dr. Babin, of course, chairs our overall committee. Is a person who understands space. He's chaired my committee for the last 10 years now, the full chairman of science. And I think he and I both feel like Isaacman can be that person who can bring the different matrix together, because it's not just the government anymore. It is the public-private partnership. That's what's allowed companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, you name it, in my district, for example, to really flourish the last 10 years.
I do want to talk a lot about public-private partnerships when it comes to space. One of the things we heard President Trump say back in July was that it would be inappropriate for Isaacman to lead NASA because of his close ties to Elon Musk, who runs SpaceX. He's obviously changed his opinion on that because he's renominated him. Do you have concerns about that close relationship or concerns about favoritism for SpaceX?
I don't. And look, the other good part about this is that when he wants something, so to speak, he's got to come talk to Congress. He's working with the president. And we are, in essence, experts in the field. And so it is going to be a partnership. It's not a dictatorial situation. I think that you'll find that Isaacman is a person who I think is very open-minded. There's always these association games people play with politics, especially when Elon Musk is involved. For the first 9 months of my tenure in Congress, I heard the term Trump-Musk at length. I thought it was one person. And so I think the politics have calmed down a bit on Elon Musk, but I think more importantly, everyone recognizes that we need to have a person dedicated exclusively to space. Again, our Secretary of Transportation has done a great job, but he has so many issues going on, let alone with the oversight of our airports, with the need of air traffic controllers and modernization, et cetera. We want a person exclusively focused here who can work with the experts in both the House and Senate, whether it be Senator Cruz or Congressman Babin on our side, and get things done focused there, because we know the China threat. As you know, we'll probably talk about it later. We have a committee meeting tomorrow talking about that true China threat. It's real, it's not imagined, and we need a person exclusively focused there, and I'm confident Mr. Isaacman will be that person.
I definitely want to get to China. There's a lot of talk about modernizing NASA for the current age of space, right? Space exploration, space research. Isaacman is one of several people who's outlined a vision for what that could look like, including some pretty drastic changes to the agency. Things like ending the Space Launch System, outsourcing some of the data collection that NASA does to private industry. Are you on board with changes like that, or what kind of reforms do you want to see at NASA?
Well, NASA has been a tremendous success. I mean, for those who don't know, my real life before I became a politician, I was a history professor. And I lived in the Kennedy Space Center era and reading books about John F. Kennedy's moonshot, the excitement that, of course, it captured not only the United States imagination, but the world's imagination. We landed on the moon in a very short period of time. NASA was a very different vehicle at that time period. As times have changed, we recognize that the innovations are really coming from the private sector. But the private sector takes different, let's just say, chances than the public sector would take. Of course, we are very concerned about safety. That's our number one responsibility, to protect those astronauts, put them in safe conditions. Whereas the innovation is coming usually from the private sector. They can, of course, react to the marketplace much quickly than an RFP process can in government world. And so we are going to have to bring those modern changes to NASA. I think they're very much open to it. And as we see the better working relationship every single day between the major players, especially SpaceX and now Blue Origin, and launching our satellites, whether it be military or commercial, into space, it's an emerging field. And I think that NASA has to be open to it. They recognize that our budgets are not endless, but we're going to get a lot more bang for the buck, in our opinion, at this point, from the private sector working with NASA, as opposed to NASA working exclusively on its own, which it had done in the past.
You mentioned budget. One of the key functions of Congress, one thing you and your colleagues are working through now, is long-term funding. We've seen a lot of debate this year about NASA's funding, pretty drastically proposed cuts to the budget from the administration. It's now looking like it may be funded at very high levels, or the budget may be expanded. What are your views on where NASA and its budget should be, the space research budget should be for the U.S. to remain competitive?
Well, again, let's look long-term about this. The NASA budget has been approximately $20 billion for a long, long time. And it was pretty static. Remember, it used to be a major part of our budget back into the 60s and early 70s. It changed in Richard Nixon, et cetera. Once we landed on the moon, the interest went away. We moved to the shuttle. That said, let's not forget, in the big bill that we passed in July, we put $10 billion into NASA beyond the base funding there. So there is a definite interest in Congress. They recognize the threat and how important it is. And it's not just about landing on the moon. That's just 1969. What we're talking about, of course, is potentially colonizing the moon, using different resources for energy or other opportunities, maybe even potentially the launch point to go to Mars. So we are going to continue to invest there. I've talked with the powers that be, so to speak, in the Congress on the funding side. They believe that the last thing we want to do right now is to move away resources. We're in this new Cold War, or de facto Cold War, with the Chinese. Well, we have moved away from some of the DEI or environmental programs. You've seen adjustments there. But on the focus of what NASA is supposed to be about, that is spaceflight, especially human spaceflight, I believe the Congress is committed to moving that forward in a thoughtful way so that we win this space race. Because as the president says accurately, it's not BS. It's like you can't be number one on Earth if you're number two in space. I mean, everyone's here today because we see a very bright future for space. The last thing I want to see is a nation that does not share our values in a variety of things, let alone the value of life like China, lead the world in space, let alone AI. That's why we need to make this investment. This is the future, and I think this is almost like a new industrial revolution, what I call AI today.
Do you see scientific research and climate research as part of NASA's mission going forward?
I think it's scientific research without doubt, but I also think there's a lot of other fields that look at environmental. I mean, the way that people make mistakes is they have so many things on their plate, they don't do one thing well. I think NASA's main focus needs to be on space flight. And there are a lot of other components, of course, NASA can play a role in, but you can't divert so many resources away from the mission to do environmental work. We can help because the satellites are there, of course, but we need to focus on, I think, the main issue. I think that sometimes when people get scattered, whether you're a high school student or a busy parent, when you have too many things on your plate, you don't do one thing well. And so I think that the partnerships we've created with the private sector and NASA's new leadership role, hopefully under Mr. Isaacman, will allow us to focus there. And where we see opportunities for this NASA to complement some of our environmental concerns, that's great. But it can't be diverting some of the funds that are necessary to win the modern day space race, in my opinion.
Have you and your Florida colleagues made any headway in your push to move NASA down to Florida?
Well, I'm always optimistic, and I think that it is helpful that the President of the United States is in Florida, and a lot of his colleagues in the cabinet are. But in a lot of ways, we've had this mission. I mean, I'll go back and bore you guys with the history for a second. the idea for NASA to be a national program, you'd have to have a lot of different interests there. Kind of like Thomas Jefferson when he created what's called the Mosquito Fleet. He wanted people to build a lot of ships in different congressional districts to make sure everyone bought into the idea of having a stronger Navy. Same thing holds true here. We have great relationships, whether it be in California, Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, all have a vested interest in our space program. If we divert all of our stuff to Florida, I'd love to have it. Would be not the smartest political thing to do. But what is happening, which I'm excited about, is that it's not just NASA jobs, which are approximately 15,000 in my district. It's the new jobs that are created at SpaceX and Blue Origin. And just to give it a little focus, and this is what's so exciting to me as a teacher, I go out and visit high schools today in Brevard County, Florida, where Kennedy Space Center is located. They're hiring high school students who have 2 or 3 years of training in high school, get the certifications necessary, and these students are graduating with $80,000, $90,000 a year jobs plus benefits at Blue Origin, SpaceX, Airbus, other companies right there in Florida. So you don't have to go to college to get a high-tech, not just job, but potentially career, because there's such an interest and the resources are coming in to invest in the space industry.
Let's talk China. Your subcommittee has a hearing tomorrow focused on China, competition in space. Give me your most sober assessment. Where do you see the U.S. is ahead, and where do you think the U.S. is falling behind?
Well, I can't get into the skiff here, obviously. I'm not going to give away secrets, but I feel like we are winning the space race, but we need to maintain that momentum. The challenge we have is that the Chinese, again, I hate to be brutal with that, but they just don't share our values. They don't have the same share of values for life for their own astronauts. They don't have the same values as far as the environmental issues that we look out after, even at Kennedy Space Center. Some things are holed up sometimes because of environmental. They have no concerns about that. And we've also seen that some of the nefarious things they've done in space. They've had collisions in space. A lot of that debris impacts the entire world because you have to adjust satellites, as you know, to avoid some of these bigger objects in space. And so they don't share those values. And they are now creating a unique relationship with the Russians as well. So not exactly our best friends have aligned together. So there's a real threat here. And they are known to steal valuable technology. You see some of these realities when you see some of their prototypes looking very similar to some of the American innovations that are taking place. So that's a real threat. The good news is that we are leading the world, and we are putting up, I think this year alone, over 100 launches out of the United States, over 90 at Kennedy Space Center. So I feel like we are winning. But if we take our foot off the gas just a little bit, they can surpass us because they are investing a lot. And they don't have some of the, let's just say, the procurement processes that we have that sometimes slow down what would be a traditional government space agency.
How can the U.S. then be more competitive? Do we need to reform procurement? Do we need to be investing in certain areas, in your view?
100% we need to reform procurement. We're seeing that in our military today. As I talked to Chairman Rogers out of Alabama and Mr. Whitman, who's probably the next Armed Services Chair out of Virginia, our procurement process is not streamlined enough. What we start out as and what we finish out are sometimes radically two different things. And we've all seen the drone warfare taking place in places like Ukraine today, radically changing the battlefield from just a few years ago. And we're moving towards unmanned drones, et cetera. And this is why AI is so important as we talk about hypersonics and all these other programs. We have to improve the procurement process, not just the overall, but just the pure speed of it, because technology is changing so rapidly. We want to make sure that our sons and daughters in the military have the best equipment possible. And so I think we're going to have to move forward in that way. And I was just having great conversations with the leaders of this group today, and they are the experts. It's not the government experts, it's the people who are in this room who we need to be listening to so we understand where technology is going. Not secondhand from a government staffer who's learning it from the real private sector. I mean, this is, let's take advantage of being a capitalist nation, and every person in this room is motivated, yes, by the intellectual curiosity of AI and space, but we're all motivated by money. And we want to, and the best object wins, and we want to make sure we're procuring the best so that we win this contest between the United States and China, because a world dominated by China is a world I don't want to live in. It's the same threat we had from the Soviets, and if you think that people say, well, fascism and communism are different, hell no, they're very similar. Centralized power that reduced freedom that you're born with, given by God.
And so what can Congress do? I mean, what do you see as your role in this, and sort of, whether it's incentivizing industry or just sort of furthering U.S. development and competition in space?
Well, I think this is kind of the start of the conversation. Candidly, a lot of members of Congress don't understand space. Candidly, they understand even less about AI. If you walk up to a member of Congress, and we were talking about this back in the green room, we are inundated with so many issues. Right now, of course, the issue du jour is healthcare. It's hard for us to become an expert in AI, let alone space, and of course, this is where they're merging together here, because we're so, as I talked about earlier, we have so many issues on our plate, we're not doing one really well. So what we want to have is a better conversation, and we need to have those point people, whether it be Dr. Babbitt or Senator Cruz, who are understanding these issues well enough where we can move the ball forward. And I think that for too long we've kind of just let this thing run on its own. We need to rely on the experts in the room and not be exclusively focused on an expert that we think who works within the government.
You mentioned Russia and China, and the Pentagon has sort of raised concern about coordination of military capabilities from both countries in space. I'm curious if you support the U.S. expanding defensive or even offensive capabilities in space. Is that kind of the next defense frontier that the U.S. should be concerned about?
Look, I'm a big believer in Ronald Reagan's peace through strength. We won the Cold War, if you really look at it, because the Soviets at that point thought that we were actually developing Star Wars. And they bankrupted the Soviet Union, and we won the Cold War. The same thing needs to hold here. We need to win this space race. We need to have space dominance so that we can keep this world a safer place. As everyone knows in the room, since at least the end of World War II, we've been the dominant nation in the world. And we are a peaceful nation. We're the most benevolent superpower in the history of the world. We can run through the Romans or the Egyptians and so forth. They were not so compassionate with the rest of the world. In my opinion, the United States is not just the greatest country in the world, but the most compassionate in the sense that we are not dictating and taking other people's lives. And so we have to win this race, and I think that the threat is real, and I do think that we will make the investment on space, and we have to make the investment on AI. And as I've talked to the experts from Sam Altman across the board, what we're all concerned most importantly is not the technology that the people in the room are creating here. We're worried that are we going to have the energy to fuel that technology to maximize the potential of AI.
And so speaking of energy, speaking of technology, I mean, what are you either most excited about, most concerned about on that front, especially when it comes to this theme of the U.S. remaining competitive in this space?
Well, I think the biggest one is maybe the word is the fear of the unknown. You know, again, speaking with some of the leaders in the group before I got on here, is that what does it mean when the bad guys get a hold of some of this information? Can they take advantage of that? Can they get into our networks and disable our military structure? Can they come into our networks potentially and turn off the energy, turn off water, disrupt everyday life in America? And these are it's the fear of the unknown that I think a lot of us have. And so by us staying on top of this and aggressively promoting the idea and be willing to not just kind of put our heads in the sand and be the leaders on AI, just like we're trying to be the leaders in crypto, for example, that's how we lead. If we just let the other players in this game lead, I think some nefarious things can happen.
You're clearly very bullish on public-private partnerships and this idea of relying more on American industry in areas like space or in tech development. I'm curious, is there a risk of being too dependent on industry, of the government giving up too much of its kind of core functions?
Well, I think that's the important part of what Congress's role is in a lot of ways, oversight. I mean, remember the fears if you give it all to the private sector, if they see the business model no longer working, they turn off the business model and you no longer have a vehicle to go into space. And so that's why we have these partnerships, the expectations played in. As you've seen with SpaceX, so I'm a big fan of SpaceX. They have not produced a lander yet, so we're starting to say, hey, we're going to have to talk to Blue Origin and other companies to potentially produce that lander. So we have certain ways to make sure that the private sector is keeping up or meeting its responsibilities. And you never want to rely on a single company. I mean, the rules of capitalism is competition is what makes America such a unique and amazing place. When you have just a monolithic or monopoly situation, things get stagnant, whether you're talking about college football or business. And so in this sense, I think it's vital that we have multiple competitors. We're seeing that happen now. With the explosion recently with the Russian vehicle, they've lost their ability, at least some of their capabilities to get into space. It'll be interesting to see how the dynamics change there, but I think that we have a pretty good balance right now between public and private partnerships, but we in the Congress need to be aggressive about oversight and to make sure that we always keep in mind that, and I brought this point a few different times, but it's absolutely vital we respect life. And these astronauts put their lives in line. They know the risk there, but we always want to make sure that space is safe. Remember, that our adversaries, we want to call that Chinese, don't have the same respect for life. And that slows us down, helps them, unfortunately, competitively, but that's who we are. And that's why we need to have the greatest innovations to protect life and also, at the same time, try to keep up with another country who doesn't share our values, whether they be stealing technology or they're caring for their astronauts or, as I said before, even the environment or that surrounds these different spaceports.
You know, I talked to a lot of people about tech and about space, and with the speed of competition, right? You talk about values like life. I mean, there are people who are concerned that, you know, we will lose some of our values or trade off some of our values in the name of speed, right? And this fear of competition, and particularly with China, that we need to compromise some of those values in the name of competition. Do you see things that way, and how do you avoid that?
Yeah, like, competition doesn't mean you sell out your ethics. We're not all Lane Kiffin, you know. It's the idea where it's that scenario where I think that you can have both. They're not mutually exclusive, and I'm pretty excited about when I, you know, just again, I'm overplaying this green room conversation. I'm not saying this is worldwide event we had in the background, but it's so exciting to talk to people who are excited about a subject. And it's clear to me that from what I saw yesterday in the meetings that were held here is that America is this land of ideas, and people want to do business in America. They know the perils that come with going into business with the Chinese. A lot of American companies found out the hard way in the last 25 years. As they steal technology, they have to, in essence, give away a lot of their secrets to do business in China. America is a very, very different place, and so I'm very bullish on it. I don't think we need to sell out our values in order to win this space race, but it is one where we as a government need to be less bureaucratic, and what I think we should exchange for that. One of the things I did in Florida, I think changed the dynamic in the way Florida does business. We need to be more transparent in the way that we do things. I mean, we all found out, I know a lot of people are critical of Doge, but the Doge is really important because it's every person is money. It's your money, and you deserve 100% to see where that money is going, and it's going to have the best ROI, not just economically, but maybe in human condition, meaning let's make sure that people who are truly in need on Medicaid or in a welfare program get the aid as opposed to the scammers who take advantage of the system. But the way you get rid of fraud and waste is that you open up and make the procurement process and other things more transparent as opposed to less transparent. The Chinese aren't transparent. It's a corrupt organization in its basic ways, just like we found out about the old Soviet Union. And so the way that I'd like to see us change and keep our ethics and win the competition is to be more transparent in this transition that we're all making right now to AI and in a changing space environment.
And what does that look like going forward? Because you mentioned federal oversight. So when it comes to oversight, when it comes to transparency, as we sort of move to a system where we are more reliant on private companies, what does the role of Congress in terms of oversight and transparency look like?
Well, one is just overwhelm people with information, because people can absorb information. The world has changed radically in the last 20 years. It's where we're taking in so much, and I think we can absorb that. I think, and and it's a line I use a lot, is that in that transparent area, we're talking about good ideas in sunshine prosper and grow like a good crop would. Bad ideas wither and die under that intense heat. And I think that we can absorb this information, and I think that it's a positive step. And we're not going to, we're not going to put out state secrets or business secrets into that transparent world, but we are going to have to say, is this investment we're making going along the right track, as opposed to just allowing bureaucratic inertia to continue to fund a broken program? And these are things that can happen. And the best people for this are not necessarily, no disrespect, the press, but there are people at home on their computer looking over this, and they're identifying some of these things, because you guys only have so much bandwidth as well. And I think that's how we change this marketplace.
Do you think, I want to end here in a minute talking about your sort of 2026 outlook, as we're about to change the calendar year, but on this transparency point, I mean, do you feel as a member of Congress you get enough transparency from private companies, those that are getting government contracts, for instance, to build out, to further our space program? Are they transparent enough with yourself and your colleagues?
Well, we are in constant communication with, especially as you know, our reliance on SpaceX candidly right now with the Falcon 9 rocket for commercial and in our world, military ventures. And we've been very pleased with the result. I mean, literally every other day they're launching out at Kennedy Space Center, creating this incredible revolution that's taking place. And when we feel, as I mentioned earlier, we feel like they're not performing, we'll go out and find them a new competitor. We proved that with the lander. So I feel much better now that I'm a new member of Congress about the transparency we have seen. When I disagree with them, and I have behind the scenes, and I say, I see what you want to show me. Now, what am I not seeing? And I'll start asking the question, to their credit, because they want to keep that government contract. We are the buyer, after all. They know that it's relying upon them to provide that information, and if they don't, bad things happen. And as a lot of these companies are contingent on stock prices and so forth, that there's a hearing or an oversight on some company that because they could have had a contract issue with the government, values diminish. So it's the reality of being in the marketplace and the marketplace of ideas. And so I've found, at least in my time, when I've asked the tough questions and said, where is this? They have been willing to open up, open the kimono, so to speak, and I think that's a good thing. And that's one of my goals as I ran for Congress, is how do we make this a more transparent process, take the mystery out of government? It's because there's so many people who've been asking me today about Congress because they read it on the internet or they saw a tweet about it, and I'm like, actually, we don't get free health care. No, we don't get a pension for life if we serve one. I mean, all these things that everyone thought was true, same thing can hold true with the procurement process. We need to be more transparent, more open, and have dialogues like this. I mean, the best part about this meeting, I've met people now who can help me accelerate my learning curve on AI, and so that I really know what's going on in space. I'm just not relying on staffers, et cetera.
We're just about out of time. For 2026, what should Congress's #1 priority be when it comes to space?
Well, I think that commercial is our big one, and I think we'd also like to get the NASA reauthorization would be a nice win as well, if we can get those across the finish line. But always keep in mind, we want to make sure that we are moving towards that public-private partnership and not exclusively reliant on the SLS, because we think that's a vehicle. But until that's ready, we need to rely on SLS. So we're excited about February, of course, being the Artemis 2 launch, and to go around the moon for the first time since 1972. It's the 250th anniversary of the United States, going around the moon for the first time since 72. It's an exciting time in America, and I couldn't be more thrilled to be a member of Congress, to be a part of the conversation we're going to have for not just 26, but in years beyond.
Well, Congressman, thanks for being here this morning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.